はい、皆さん、こんにちは。米国特許セミナー、ExaminIrks です。このセミナーは、審査官を困らせないことをテーマにした、特許実務セミナーです。講師は、米国特許弁護士であるブライアン・エプスタインさんです。第13回の今回は、独立クレームと限定要求、選択要求に関する実務についてお送りします。それでは早速解説いただきます。Okay, Brian-san, please share your thoughts on independent claims associated with restriction or election requirements.
Sure. So patent applications sometimes have multiple different inventions. These inventions might have relationships like a computer server and a computer client. It could be training a machine learning model and applying the machine learning model. And applicants sometimes claim these inventions in one application. It might be original claims. They might be added during and therefore trigger a restriction or an election. They could also be added during prosecution, in which case there often is not a restriction or an election. And the reason this might occur is that in the United States, our basic filing fees include 3 independent claims and 20 total claims. And as long as you stay within that scope, there's no additional government fees. And so, trying to claim these different inventions in one application might be seen as conserving fees. And as I mentioned, an examiner might not issue a restriction or an election if there are, in fact, multiple inventions claimed in an application. And so what we're assuming here that a restriction or an election is proper, as is often the case when we have, server-client type relationships. But the issue is that humans are imperfect. And so there are a variety of reasons why an examiner might not issue a restriction or an election in a case, right? Maybe this is a national stage of a PCT application, and the examiner is familiar with restriction or election practice in the United States, but not with this concept of unity of invention. Or maybe the examiner does know about unity of invention, but they don't want to bother performing a search to find prior art to establish that lack of unity of invention. Additionally, maybe the examiner believes that she can easily find art for all of the claims. And so, the examiner believes that examining all of the claims together does not create an additional burden. And so the issue is that, examiners often regret this decision because they end up doing twice as much work. You're examining both sets of independent claims. And when we add independent claims during prosecution, in addition to elections and restrictions for original claims, mid-prosecution restrictions generally are limited to election by original presentation, and that's described in the cited MPEP section, or they are these kinds of restrictions are limited by shift, discussed in this other MPEP section. And the issue is that examiners almost never issue restrictions after examining a claim, right? If you've already received one office action examining these claims, then the examiner is very unlikely to issue a restriction or an election on the examined claims. This is kind of a USPTO policy. I don't think it's an official one, right? It's not in the MPEP, but that's generally how the examiners will behave, which can be a little frustrating because sometimes, we want these elections, we want these restrictions on claims added mid-prosecution, or even original claims that were not elected out, and our examiner won't give it to us. And this frequently happens, especially in the case of independent claims added during prosecution, because the examiner's just in this mindset of examining, right? They don't pause and think about, well, this independent claim is directed to really different subject matter, and I can do half as much work if I just ask the applicant to restrict it out. So an examiner often cannot or will not force the applicant to restrict or elect, right? Once there's an office action issued on a claim, they're not going to issue this election. And so they kind of want you to cancel the claim instead. The issue is that most applicants will not tolerate cancellation of claims without a reason, right? I can't write to my applicant and say, we conducted the interview, the examiner agreed about the amendment of claim 1, and then with regard to independent claim 10, directed to the client, the computer client, as opposed to the computer server of claim 1, please cancel claim 10 because the examiner doesn't want to examine that anymore, right? Applicants don't really like that. And so the question is, how do we make both our applicant and the examiner happy?
はい。ここまでの解説を簡単にまとめますと、一つの出願に複数の異なる発明が含まれている場合に、限定要求や選択要求が出されるのが妥当な場合があるんですが、審査官が誤ってそれらの要求を出さないことがあるということでした。で、この場合に、その後の審査の途中で出す限定要求には制限があるため、審査官としては出しにくいということでした。では、どのようにすればいいかについて、次に解説いただきます。Okay, Brian-san, next slide, please.
Sure. So the solution is, after one independent claim is allowed, that's when we cancel the other independent claim. In the previous slide, we discussed how we don't really have a good reason to cancel the claims, for example, after an interview, or even, without an interview, just in response to the office action. But once we have this allowed claim, we can change our position and go to our applicant and say, look, if we cancel independent claim 10, then this application will proceed to issuance or to allowance. And that's usually a good enough reason for the applicant to say, okay, I would rather have a patent today and, delay a decision on these other claims, as opposed to continuing prosecution for some, undetermined period of time while we prosecute independent claim 10 as well. And in a moment, we'll discuss another reason to adopt this strategy. Okay, fine. But why didn't we cancel the claim previously, right? Why didn't we cancel claim 10 previously? And the answer is, we don't know which claim is more difficult to allow, right? We've got these two claims progressing in prosecution, moving towards allowance. Usually we've got different amendments to these claims to overcome the art. We don't know, when one is going to become allowable and the other one isn't. yet the other one isn't. And so by obtaining an allowance of one of these claims, now we know which one's allowed, right? Now we can go to the applicant and say, cancel the other one. Let's get this case allowed. And, we can reserve this other independent claim for later. And so just as a practice tip while we're discussing it, I want to suggest that when we cancel this other independent claim, we want to put some sort of self-serving comment in the remarks, right? Canceling claims can create disclaimers of subject matter. And so we want to kind of put on the record that we want to maintain the right to pursue this canceled independent claim in a continuation application. And so that's what we're discussing here is, this is that other reason, is that we want to pursue the different claim, again, in the example, it's claim 10, in a continuation application. But why? Why am I making such a big deal out of this? There's this concept of claim interpretation in which claims in the same patent will be interpreted similarly, right? So, something, the way it's written, the way the claim recites the computer server will be interpreted similarly to the way that claim 10 recites the computer client. And maybe we don't want that, right? These are supposed to be different inventions. And so if we push claim 10 to this continuation application, we can better emphasize its different scope, right? We don't need the claims to recite similar subject matter. We can use different words. We can have different concepts in there. And this will kind of give us a different scope of patent protection so that, we can better cover the actions and products of our competitors. And now that we've moved claim 10 into a continuation application, we can supplement this claim with other statutory classes, with other independent claims to different statutory classes, right? Towards the beginning today, I reminded the audience that in the United States, we have 3 independent claims for the same filing fee, same basic filing fee. And so now, instead of just having one independent claim towards, the computer client, we can have one directed towards the method performed by the client and another directed towards, for example, a computer readable medium, that can perform the steps of the method. And so we really increase the overall scope of protection by having 2 applications, splitting them into, splitting the different inventions into the different applications so that their claims can be interpreted more distinctly. We're making our examiner happy, right? Because they don't have to do twice as much work. And hopefully we're making our applicant happy as well because, they have a broader scope of protection. And they can also make better decisions about, maybe maintenance fees or something, because if they're all in one application, maybe, I don't know, maybe not for maintenance fees, actually. But certainly there's definitely benefits to having them in different applications. And that concludes it.
はい、ここでは、一つの独立クレームが許可された後に、もう一方の独立クレームをキャンセルするという方法があるということでした。そしてキャンセルする際に必ずコメントを残して、キャンセルしたクレームを継続出願する方法について解説いただきました。今回はこれで以上になります。ご質問や使ってほしいトピックなどがありましたら、YouTube のコメント欄に書いていただくか、スライド最後に記載のメールアドレスまでお気軽にご連絡ください。では本日もありがとうございました。失礼します。